Good evening. Welcome to another Heritage Commission public meeting. My name is Nathan Merrill. I'm the current chair, and I'm going to be co-presenting this evening with my colleague Jeff Hyland, who is a Scammon family descendant. So we're looking forward to sharing some of the things we know. We probably know enough to be dangerous, right? So I would like to thank the Heritage Commission members. I think if you could please stand so people could see who you are. Anybody who's here? Thank you. Also, we'd like to thank the Board of Selectmen for their ongoing support of our work, and the Stratham voters like yourselves for continuing to support our work. So let me start by explaining why we chose to pursue a National Register Historic District for the Richard Scammon Farm on River Road. And the reason is that despite the fact that the original farm of over 200 acres has been impacted by construction of roads, commercial and residential development, there is a core 100 acres of unspoiled, intact, original land and a nice set of historic buildings that we're going to show you and explain to you more about tonight. So the Heritage Commission a couple of years ago started this process. It was a long process. We hired a preservation consultant to help us with the paperwork to nominate it. It first goes to the State Division of Historical Resources for review. They determine if it's eligible for the National Register. And then once they give it the green light, then it goes down to Washington, D.C., to the National Park Service, and they ultimately chose to list it on the National Register. It is Stratham's first National Register Historic District, and only. It is a non-regulatory historic district. So some of you might be familiar with downtown Exeter or downtown Portsmouth. Those are regulatory historic districts where there is a historic district commission. Property owners are bound by a whole separate set of rules on what they can and can't do. In this case, it's purely a recognition of the historic integrity and value of what's there, and in the hopes that people will appreciate what's there and future owners will steward it thoughtfully. So with that, let's move on. So these two maps were recently drawn for us by Peter Wiggin, and they are copyrighted. And the first one on the left is the so-called Quonset patent, and it's basically in three sections. The first two sections are what is today Stratham. The third section at the bottom is now part of Exeter. And the upper two-thirds of it, part one there, is the Captain Thomas Wiggin and partners. So that's the upper two-thirds of town, basically from the northern edge of Doug and Stella Scammon's farm points north. And then the part two section is the Shrewsbury patent, and that was where the Scammons come in. The map on the right is sort of a blow-up of the Shrewsbury patent, and here you've got what's today Portsmouth Avenue. Back then it was known as the Country Way, and later the Great Kings Highway. And here is River Road. And let's see, let me orient myself. This is Stratham Heights Road, Guinea Road. And so the Scammons originally settled here, along with the Singlers, which became Sinclair. Many of you are probably familiar with this map. This is a portion of Phineas Merrill's 1793 map of Stratham. We're truly fortunate to have this resource. Phineas was a resident of the town, and this is the oldest known map of any town in the state of New Hampshire. It's a real resource for us. And it shows, if I can make the pointer work, which button is it, Jeff?
There's a little red line. Yeah.
So you can see here the two Scammon dwellings. So the first generation of Richard Scammon immigrated with his father to Boston and then Portsmouth. In 1661, he married Prudence Waldron, who was the daughter of Dover settler William Waldron. And that's how Richard acquired the so-called Shrewsbury patent. They settled on the site in 1665 and raised 10 children. In the 17th century, all of the action, all the settlement, and all the development that was happening in Stratham was between the countryway and the river. And the river was the main mode of transport, the main avenue of economic activity. The countryway was laid out as the Great King's Highway between Exeter and Portsmouth in 1681. And Quaybog Lane, today's River Road, was laid out in 1691. Richard and Prudence and their heirs settled the entire area south of River Road and west of Portsmouth Avenue, from the Exeter town line at Wheelwright Creek up to River Road. Their youngest son, William, served in the French and Indian Wars. And locally, he served on the committee charged with building the first meeting house and church when Stratham became its own town, independent from Exeter, in 1716. William and Richard's only surviving child, Richard, also Richard, there are many Richard Scammons, you're going to find that out tonight, married Elizabeth Weeks of Greenland. Those of you who are locals know that the Weeks are a big and deeply rooted family in Greenland. And they built a house at the site of today's Market Basket. That's what you see up there. He was a successful farmer and became a ship owner in the West Indies trade as well. They had 8 surviving children. The oldest was another William, to keep things confusing, who built the house that formerly stood at the site of today's Optima Dermatology. Their youngest son, James, built the farm at 25 River Road, which is the subject of tonight's talk. This is the William Scammon house. So this is what stood where Optima is now, on Portsmouth Avenue. And this is 25 River Road, for those of you who have never ventured down there. On this map, this is the 1857 Rockingham County map. And you can see that James Scammon is now over here on River Road. And the other two houses, the old Scammon houses, are still here on Portsmouth Avenue. And this is the 1892 herd map. And now there's only one. So this is the house where Optima stood. The other one where Market Basket is was gone by then. I don't know if it was lost to fire, which is the most likely thing. The Richard Scammon house is, the James Scammon house is now occupied by Richard M. Scammon. The Scammon Cemetery now appears here, and the town landing is shown. This is a contemporary aerial photo with the tax lots shown. And the red area is roughly the bounds of the original Scammon Farm, and the purple part in the center is the part that is surviving and is now the National Historic District. So this is part of the process of applying for the National Register. And the preservation consultant comes in and looks at all the buildings, makes sketches, and determines which ones are contributing to the historic integrity of the site. So on your left is 21 River Road, home of the Smiths. In the middle is 23 River Road, And down here is 25 River Road, which is the main original complex of buildings, now home of the Pauls. And this is a modern aerial view of the same site. So back to the house. Oh, let's see. So again, James and Lydia Scammon built this house. They were generation number 4, built in the Federal style. It's a central chimney design, which is beginning to go out of style by this point. To my knowledge, this is the latest or the newest house in Stratham that survives with a central chimney design. We don't have many central chimney 2-story colonial houses left, period. Maybe 10, rough, give or take. They moved into the house just weeks before the start of the War of 1812. James Scammon was a successful farmer, but also a businessman who dealt in real estate. He became the largest landowner in town during his time. The farm saw significant growth and development during his tenure, with more land cleared for agricultural production and expanding livestock inventories reported on the agricultural census and also on the town tax rolls. This is an interior photo of an original Federal period mantle and fireplace surround. And this picture shows how the house was remodeled in the late 19th century by Colonel Richard M. Scammon. And you can see the front door that's replaced. That's not the original front door. And these interior doors are also not original. I put in one picture of the cellar because if there are people in this room who've never been in the basement of a house with a central chimney, that's the base of the chimney. It takes up half the entire house in the basement. It is phenomenal. And it's all field stones mortared, and you can see just at the top is where the bricks start. This is back on the River Road frontage. Gives you a nice view of the house, and then the sheds that were built in the 1840s, and then the main barn that was built in 1860. That's a better view of the main barn. It was built in 1860. It measures 40 feet by 84 feet. It replaces an earlier barn of similar size. It has a slate roof, which was often utilized in that period for fire protection. The slate roofing on the house was likely added at the same time. The original roof there was wood shingles. The barn was built for Richard and Abigail Scammon, generation number 5, for those of you who are keeping track. Richard served as chair of the select board for many years. Their children all attended private school and colleges. And that's a recurring theme. This is a well-educated farming family through the generations. This is a view off River Road looking back southwards into the fields. The barn is right here. Here's the barn. This is the east facade of the barn facing the house. And it's a classic New England Yankee-style barn. And what do we mean by a Yankee-style barn? It has big doors on the gable ends, so you can drive right in with a hay cart. The older English-style barns have the doors on the side walls, and they're not drive-through. You have to back into them. Note on this particular barn, the doors are offset from the center of the roof peak. And that's relatively unusual in 19th century barns, but there's a lot of them in the seacoast area. And the reason for that is the farms here in that era were larger and more productive than the inland farms. And so they needed more storage for hay. So the hay was always stored on the north side, cow stable is on the south side. This is a picture of the cow stable. Again, you see the south side windows, and it's whitewashed, which happened in the 20th century to comply with the pasteurized milk ordinance for sanitation reasons. So any of these old timber frame barns you go in, if they were utilized for dairy, they all have a whitewashed stable, always facing south or east. This is outside on the south facing side. So the cows would have been turned out this door. And you can see the granite posts that once supported a fence. And this would have been an outdoor loafing area that the cows could be turned out at while they cleaned the barn inside. This is the interior roof framing of the barn. So I could get into the architectural style and technique, and Drew could help me, but unfortunately we don't have time. But I just think it's always impressive to look up in these buildings. This is the circa 1830 cider house. It's probably my favorite building on the site. It's a really neat building, especially on the inside. This is a picture of the apple trees in bloom. In 1880, according to the census, they reported 4 acres of orchard with 200 trees. So that's why they had a cider house. Nobody's going to eat that many apples. This is a nice view of the backside, showing again the cider house and the main barn. And here's the cow loafing area and the vegetable garden, which the Pauls still maintain today. And every farm had a vegetable garden, usually a large one, for fresh produce in season and for canning to sustain the family through the winter. It's a nice view of the River Road frontage. Fields are off on your left. This is the circa 1965 Sim House, which Jeff is going to tell you the story behind this one in a few minutes. It's a fun story. This is the farm manager's house, built by Richard M. Scammon, circa 1910. It replaces an earlier one on the same site that burned. So Colonel Richard M. and Annie Scammon were generation 6, and they maintained this residence to house their on-site farm manager. It was a big farm for its time, and it was more than a one-man show. They milked up to 12 cows, which that alone would require 2 men twice a day to milk that many cows by hand. Jeff will tell you more about Richard and Annie shortly as well. This is the side and rear view of 21 River Road, with a garage that was added by the Smiths circa 1968, and a barn that was built in 1972 with an antique timber frame brought from somewhere else. This is the back side of that barn. And here we have the Scammon family cemetery, which is on the River Road frontage, the northeast corner of 21 River Road. And that's the Scammon monument. The stone wall runs continuously along River Road. And there were previously some interior stone walls which were removed in the 20th century to make the fields bigger for 20th century farming. This is a view of the field as it looks today, looking towards the back side of Market Basket down here. At the present time, the Stewart farm hazed the land for their dairy herd. And previously, when the W. Douglas Scammon Farm had cows, they rented this land for decades in the last half of the 20th century. So it continues to support Stratham cows, even though the cows haven't been at the the Owen Scammon Farm in decades. This is again a nice view of the back. You can see barn, house, cider house, and 23 River Road. 21 River Road is just behind the trees up there. This is another great picture. It's undated. I would guess it was the first half of the 20th century sometime. You can see these ventilation stacks were added to ventilate the stable. You often would see cupolas on the top of a dairy barn in the 20th century. I imagine they did it this way instead to avoid messing with the slate roof. This is a wonderful resource. This is one of the oldest pictures I've seen of any property in Stratham. It's circa 1870s. And it shows the house before Richard and Annie remodeled it. So it has the original front door, and it has the original 9/6 windows downstairs and 6/6 windows upstairs. It still has the chimney in this shed here. Nice view of the stone wall. And there are people. You can't see who they are, but there's, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 people out there in the front yard or out in River Road. So it's a real gem of an image. This one is a little bit newer. So this is after the remodel. And again, you can see the cider house, the big barn, the sheds, and the house. But now there's a front porch, and the chimney has been parged. This is a closer up view of the house from that period. So you've got the Victorian era porch with its elaborate brackets. You've got shutters, exterior shutters on the windows, which the house still has some of its original interior sliding shutters. But the exterior shutters came in fashion by the late 19th century. And I really like this picture because you get the flowering apple trees. Another similar shot, a little bit newer. Notice there's the chimney's been painted probably from the same time. And this is the most recent slide in my set before I turn you over to Jeff. And this is after Richard Scammon died and Annie was here and she screened in the porch. And this is a view of 21 River Road, the farm manager's house. So that, my friends, is my part. It's my pleasure to turn it over to Jeff.
Thanks, Nate. That was very thorough, I have to say. And I'm hopefully going to continue that thoroughness. So my name is Jeff Hyland. I am Jeffrey Richard Hyland, actually, because there are a lot of Richards in my Scammon lineage, so I had to have a Richard middle name. And I am actually part of the 10th generation of Scammons, and I live here in Stratham. And I live on a small parcel of land that was part of the original acreage. To kind of show you a little bit of kind of like how I got here, I guess. This is kind of a family tree that I learned recently my Uncle Richard, another Richard, created or drew up probably 30, 40 years ago. The James Scammon that Nate mentioned is kind of right here. And it kind of, the ownership of the farm traveled down. And then this is me right here. And then actually my cousin Ann, who was visiting from Maryland, she's right here. So we have 2 Scammon family members here in the audience. So showing a little more detail. There's the James Scammon, who actually built the house, Richard Scammon, and then Richard M. Scammon. And this is the Richard M. Scammon that married Annie Wiggin. So that's the Richard and Annie that you hear a lot of talk about. And then Richard E., he's my grandfather. So Richard E. was the nephew of Richard M. I know it gets a little confusing having all these Richards, and it's confusing for me, and I'm sure everyone. So to kind of put a face with the family tree, so Richard M., who lived in the farmhouse, the Scammon Farmhouse, and Annie Wiggin, so they were husband and wife. And then this is my grandfather, Richard E. Scammon, and my grandmother, Julia Scammon. And so the way the property kind of moved in my family is when Richard Scammon passed away in 1914, he willed the property to his nephew, Richard E. Scammon. The will granted Annie Scammon life tenancy. So she remained at the farm, operating the farm, basically managing it with the assistance of Fritz Olson, who was the farm manager, and other laborers. She lived in that farm for about 50 years, managing that farm, while my grandfather and my grandmother lived in mostly in Minneapolis and Kansas City. So they did not live around here, and yet they were basically owners of the farm in Stratham, which, if you can imagine, that created a little bit of tension between within the family, because Richard E. and Julia, who basically owned the farm, paid the taxes, and helped kind of maintain the buildings, and offered as much financial assistance as possible to Annie. And I have a lot of letters. Some of them have gone to the Historical Society. I recently found some additional letters up in my attic that were my mother's. And these are just some examples. And if you start reading them, and it's very interesting, you can kind of see that there was tension between, the different members of the family, talking about the finances and the taxes owed. But there's also some interesting glimpses into kind of farm life and the products of the farm. In particular, Annie Scammon talks a lot about seasonally what's happening on the farm. So, bushels of apples being collected, or pounds of potatoes being picked. And then weather is another big topic in a lot of these letters. And then on top of that, and then the finances. That was also kind of part of the discussion. So this letter, I think, was from 1915. And then this one's from 1941, it looks like. So, the letters that were written between the family here really span a long period of time. So the next group of people, so let me go back one. So my grandmother, Julia Scammon, and my grandfather, Richard E. Scammon. So Richard passed away, or died fairly young. He was, I think, in the early 60s. And so Julia Scammon was a widow for a number of years. And so she relied a lot on other family members. Her son, another Richard, this was a Richard M. Scammon, and this Richard M. Scammon, the son of Julia, is the father of Anne Scammon, who is here visiting. My mother, who I think probably a lot of you recognize, Jean Scammon, my mother. And then another individual who was really instrumental in preserving the farm or helping at the farm was I call him Uncle Bill. He was actually my grandmother's nephew, but he really was more like a son to my grandmother. And then just to kind of wrap things up, this picture, this is Anne Scammon, when she was quite a bit younger, visiting the farm. And then this is actually me. I grew up, and one of the kind of the difficult things for me, or interesting possibly, is that I didn't grow up in Stratham. I grew up in Rhode Island, and throughout my childhood, I heard a lot about Stratham. Stratham was always kind of this, kind of perfect place in the country. And because my mother and my uncle held on to land up here, even after the houses were sold, my mother and I often had kind of annual pilgrimages up here to Stratham. And we would kind of walk the woods. And as I got older, and this one, here I am, I'm probably like 14, I think. I decided I was going to go explore the Squamscott River. So this is me right at the end of River Road, trying to launch a boat through the mud into the Squamscott River so that I can go explore. Probably wanted to get out to the little island that's out there. And actually, before I want to make note of this photograph. It's a really nice photograph of my Uncle Bill. And I'll talk about that a little bit more as we move forward. So fast forward a little bit. So here we are, August 10th, 1962. This is when Annie Scammon passes away. And when she passes away, the property, the land, all the buildings get passed on to my grandfather, Richard E., and Julia Scammon. Unfortunately, my grandfather has passed away. So he passed away in the 50s. So my grandmother inherited the farm. And she lived at the time, my grandfather and grandmother had retired to Branson, Missouri, and to actually a small farm in Branson. They lived primarily in Kansas City, but they retired to Branson. My Uncle Bill, so the nephew of Julia, lived out in Southern California. Richard Scammon, Anne's father, lived just outside of Washington, D.C., and my mother lived in Kingston, Rhode Island, was a professor at the University of Rhode Island. So this is where people were kind of spread out, spread out all over the country when Annie Scammon passed away. When she passed away, as Nate kind of showed you this already, this was basically the land that went along with the farm, the farmhouse and the farm manager's house. It also included the island or the severed ox bow out in the river, and what's now all the house lots. Just for your, so I live right here where that little red dot is. So I do still live in part of the original 225 to 250 acres of Scammon property. And I lived there with my wife, Donna Jensen. So when Annie passed away, the house was not in great shape. I mean, I'm sure we all, as you age, I'm getting older, and it becomes, obviously harder and harder to kind of maintain properties. At a farm of this size, it must have been really difficult for a single woman trying to kind of with the farmhand, but still, it was a lot of work. So it did slowly fall into disrepair. So this is 1962 when my grandmother, Julia Scammon, inherited the farmhouse. And I believe that this photo is from her first visit after Annie Scammon passed away. This is the back of the house. There's a nice, big hole in the outbuilding or the L, and it really is in tough shape. The chicken coop has kind of collapsed in, broken windows. One thing I'll mention, so you see this little Volkswagen Bug that's sitting over here. my grandmother always had Volkswagen Bugs. I don't know how many she had, but that's how I know that my grandmother was likely here, is because of that Volkswagen Bug. These are some pictures of the inside. So you can kind of imagine you've inherited this property, you walk into the kitchen, and this is kind of what you find. These are some of the, so this is like the parlor and the dining area. So I still have this bookcase in my house, which is kind of interesting. Kind of fun to see it in an old picture. So, it was quite a nice, interior for a farm. I don't know a lot about, how farms were furnished, but to me, it seems like it was a nicely furnished property. And so in addition to the main farmhouse, this was the farm manager, Fritz Olson's house, and that you could basically, it was just to the kind of the northeast of the front of the farm. So obviously the farm was in a lot of disrepair. My grandmother had inherited, that's right here, right there, Julia had inherited it, but it was too much for her to handle, so she kind of enlisted my mother, right there, and my father to come. They lived in Rhode Island, so they were enlisted to come up and help work on fixing the place up. This right here is my Uncle Bill. He came from California and came to Stratham and actually spent quite a bit of time in Stratham. He lived here for a number of years. And I recognize these people, these are all actually friends of my parents from Rhode Island. So obviously people came, and converged on this farm to try to fix it up, to save it, kind of pull it back from the precipice, I guess. And here's but all this work, I guess occasionally there was still some fun to be had. So that's my mother out in the field on a horse. And I'm pretty sure, and some people might, somebody here might know, that to me, this might be Aunt Annie's horse, because I did find a picture with Aunt Annie with a very similar horse. It looked like the same horse to me. And then, as Nate said, this is that contemporary building in between the Smith's house and the Pauls. It is owned by the Pauls. Within my family, it was always called Bill's Folly. So it was my Uncle Bill, and he moved up to Stratham to help my grandmother with the farm pretty soon after she moved up here, so probably like 1964 or so. And fairly soon after that, probably a year later, he decided to build this. And oftentimes I run into people that are like, what's the deal with the contemporary house out in the field? And one of the interesting things, if you remember back to that photo that I showed you of him, it's a really pretty nice headshot. Well, my Uncle Bill wanted to be an actor, and he lived in California, and that was his actor headshot. Now, he never really became much of an actor, as far as I know, and he moved to Stratham to help my grandmother, but still, clearly, he loved California. So this, to me, is, Southern California, basically, in Stratham. And that's what he wanted to build, because that's where he came from, and that's where he really wanted to be, although he just couldn't make acting work for him.
Hey, Jeff, can I just interject? I forgot to mention during my talk that is, to our knowledge, the oldest contemporary style house in Stratham. And it is a contributing building to the historic district. It is a historic building that contributes to the fabric of that historic district.
Yeah, and I just love the fact that it gives you this glimpse into this individual's kind of mindset and what he brought to Stratham from far away. And, so here's a picture of my mother, my grandmother, my father out in front of the house. It's clear it's been nicely fixed up. The porch was torn off to kind of restore it back to the original facade. Do you notice there's a bug again? It's a different bug, but I think my grandmother must have upgraded or something. But it's looking pretty good at this point. It's yeah, definitely. Although I'm a landscape architect, and some of you know that, and to me these look like hemlock trees in front of the house. And probably not something you'd want to plant right in front of the house. Knowing my father, he probably went out into the woods and harvested them. And then I do remember a lot of stories as I was growing up about the 250th anniversary and how the house was open to the public, and there were busloads of people that came by. And this is from that day. You got a leaf from that sign right there. And then again, right there, there's a Volkswagen Bug right there. They're all over the place. And I think this might be my last slide. I wanted to show this to you because I found these in a number of, it's River Road with a little bit of snow. And luckily I've lived off of River Road for 23 years, and I've never seen this much snow, and I'm not sure I like snow, but I'm not sure I want that much snow. And then at one point I had a conversation with Peter Wiggin, and Peter Wiggin thought he knew who that would be on the bulldozer. Right there. So it's a small community, but a lot of great things have happened over the years. And I'm happy to be part of Stratham. And I'm very happy to at the Smiths and the Pauls. I mean, it's kind of amazing. So my family sold those two properties in 1967 to the same owners that have them today. So it's a really long time in this day and age to own a piece of property. And they've been great stewards for the houses, and yeah. I'm glad this has all come about. It's a great, as a Scammon family member, it's very much an honor to be part of the historic district and to see things continue on.
Without those two families' support, we could not have done the National Register listing. So thank you. Round of applause.
Yes.
Yeah, I think I remember that storm because we lived at the end of River Road at the time. It was February '69, and the road was blocked for 3 days.
Wow.
Because the first day the snowplow came down and got stuck, and they had to call in a front end loader from Pease to get the snowplow unstuck, and we had to use snowmobiles to go up to the farm to Uncle Doug's to get milk, because there was just no passage for three days.
Swansea Road was completely stopped of traffic.
Wow.
The only year my husband couldn't get out to deliver eggs. It was at 77.
Wow.
We remember that
That was a
storm
bad
well
storm.
because the drifts were so hard that our kids could climb on them and touch the wires.
Really?
That's how hard those
That's
drifts
it.
were
Wow.
right in front.
Was it still a
Nobody
dirt
believes
road?
me when I
Wasn't
tell
it
Yes, it
still a
was.
dirt
But
road?
Well, right
Yeah.
after Annie.
Yeah, it was down.
Yes.
All that snow.
Yeah. Don't
Yeah,
get
but-
those often anymore.
Of Jim Scammon
Yeah.
snowshoeing on top of my mailbox. Coming up the street with snowshoeing.
I have a few comments.
Sure.
Number one, Richard Scammon, the original, his profession was a gunsmith. Very rare profession, and highly skilled, obviously. James Scammon, who married Lydia Parker Wiggin. I was at the Exeter Public Library in the History and Genealogy room, and I read that there was a very bad summer, and that a lot of farmers had to eat their seed stock of corn, and he, come spring, sold his excess to the local farmers so that they could grow corn. because he always grew more than he needed.
Wow, that's interesting. So when was that?
I don't remember the date. I don't even remember the source. I just remember where I read it.
Interesting.
And and it was made mention that he became very wealthy because of it.
Yeah.
Neither of you mentioned James's book,
You're right.
1824,
Yeah.
Culpeper,
Yeah.
rewrites. He did.
That's in the National Register nomination form, but we did not mention it tonight.
There's a
Yeah.
copy at the Exeter Library.
I'd like to see that. I've never seen one.
It's in the history and genealogy room.
Yes.
I remember
Can you
it.
explain how the Forest Society came to have a large portion of what's now the district?
Sure. Yeah. So I'll just go back. So to that map. That's kind of yeah. So the selling of the land kind of went through a couple different phases. So the farmhouse, the main farmhouse, and the property now the Smiths. Those, as well as a whole bunch of these road, were subdivided off of the main property, I think in around 67, maybe 66. And my mother and my Uncle Richard held on to all of this land. And actually my grandmother too. Held on to all that after they sold the main farm, these two lots. They held on to pretty much everything else. In, I think 1977-ish, maybe 76.
72
72?
was Market Basket.
Okay, my grandmother sold that piece of land to Market Basket, and then my mother and Uncle Richard continued to hold on to everything else, well into the 80s. And I'm trying to think. I don't know the exact date, but at some point in the 80s, they kind of caved into pressure to sell, and they did sell to a developer. They basically sold everything to a developer except for the piece of land that I live on. And all these lots along here, they kind of got sold off sporadically over the years. I think the last one, if I remember correctly, it's this one right here. It's actually, I think that's what it is. Oh no, it's this one right here. It's actually the Moriartys, if we're in the AU on River Road. I believe they were the last lot that got sold, and I think that was one of my Uncle Richard's lots. So then, this was all owned by a developer, Lionel Labonte, and he developed Oxbow Farm Road, and my property is off Oxbow Farm Road. And then there was some transfer to some other development entities, and Shaw's was built. And then at a certain point, the remaining land, which is kind of right in the middle, I don't know, it didn't really go up for sale, but I think he basically approached, I don't know, maybe Becky, you have some insight into that. I don't know exactly how that happened, whether Lionel Labonte approached the Forest Society, or it actually went to the Nature Conservancy, I think, initially.
It was actually Mark Stevens and Susan Conway
Okay.
who bought it from Labonte.
Okay, and they developed
Shaw's. And then they sold the backland to the Nature Conservancy.
Okay. And then it got transferred to the Forest Society for long-term maintenance and ownership. It is, it's fairly wet back there. It's, there's some trails back there, and they're actually, it is it's not town property, it's Forest Society property, but it is open for people to use. And there are a few points of access. That right there, you can actually access, there's a small right-of-way in between two house lots where you can actually go back to that land. There are a couple trails. There's like one logging road and a couple little trails. It's nice.
Jeffrey, you mentioned hemlock
Mm-hmm.
in one,
Yeah, the front door.
House.
Yeah.
on George Clemens, my friend, and I safari walked the woods quite a bit, looked around.
Mhm.
There was a sawmill
Okay.
that he used a lot. It was a huge pile of sawdust and some other tin cans, and the brow was still there with some logs on it.
So whereabouts was that? I found a picture of just some remnants of a foundation, and it said something about a
It's kind
sawmill.
of in back of Ruth Paul's, but you'd have to go south more deeper into the woods.
So
I can
kind of
show
down
you.
in there.
It doesn't, you can't, there's no evidence of it today.
Really?
No, but you just had to see it, because there's nothing, all those huge piles of sawdust, everything, there's nothing left.
Oh, I didn't
Wow.
recognize.
Well, we took a few slabs home, I remember that.
There's a few around the farm too.
Wow.
My house is totally made of hemlock, which is a terrible wood. Hates nails.
Yeah.
You can't pull a nail out, you'll pull the head off until it comes out. But the whole house is boarded with waney edge
Wow.
hemlock. Of course, when they roofed, the nails went right through because there wasn't any wood.
Yeah.
And then the side of the house was sided with hemlock, waney wood, so there were gaps. We tried everything, blown in insulation, which blew right back up under the clay. So, the house was constructed poorly, especially by today's standard. There's no ridge pole, the rafters of various dimension and various spacing. And, but the thing that drew me to it was the upstairs part of the house never got used. Olson stayed down in the kitchen in a small room off the kitchen. And who's the other fellow that gave all the money to the hysterical? Foot? And Foot did, didn't he? Yeah, but it was just primed wood, all trimmed, door casings and everything. But it never, nobody ever walked by it or banged it. So the whole upstairs didn't need a lot of work.
Huh.
But,
So do you think all the hemlock that was used in your house, was it actually cut back here in the
100%.
mill? In the
I
sawmill?
like to think it was milled there.
Well,
I don't know how you'd ever,
right, you couldn't prove that, I suppose. but-
Joel said there's no photos or anything.
Huh.
But it was a pretty good sized mill. And it had sawed a lot of logs because the pile was as high as that screen.
Wow, that's a lot.
But I don't know, was there any hemlock used in the Paul's house, the 1812?
I don't know.
Yeah, we don't know.
It's a mixture of pine and hemlock.
Yeah. When, did you see the house before Fritz Olson had moved out of the house you live in? I had heard that he held on to a lot of things, and the house is pretty full, to say the least.
You mean stuff?
Yes,
Fine
stuff. Everything was piled up above the windows. And I never found a photo, but in my, I think my mother said stories like, oh, yeah, the house was full.
Left stuff
Yeah.
was,
Stuff.
because he was sick, his gangrene foot, when they took him to Brentwood, bought him a house. But, what was I gonna say? I got a Biden moment here. But, he in a Exeter car came to my house one time. Quite a few years. How long had we been there? Probably 10 years. And he came and I had never met him, so I went out and asked him what he wanted. He says, I'm here for my plow. He said, plow. He
Wanted his
said,
plow
"Well, I
back."
had a plow out back here. Actually, came to get it for the guy that was with it, who was an Exeter cop. And I told him, I said, there's no more stuff here. Yeah, I know it was here. He said, I had a car made into a saw. you know, those death saws that people had. And he was having a bad moment too, I guess. He had sort of dementia, but I never met him.
No.
Dottie Clements met it and could talk to him because he sold veggies out of the back of a Model A pickup truck. And, but we never saw him, did we? Huh? He came to the house?
Yes.
But he never got upstairs in that house.
I guess he didn't need to, right? He was happy staying down on the first floor.
When your ancestors, not to pick on you, Jeff,
No, feel free.
they had to fix up the house for him. And when we bought it, it had a cast iron sink and a pitcher pump, traditional, and it got the water from a cistern, which was full of dead mice, frogs, everything. Well, it was a brick, it was actually a beautiful system. It was a brick beehive shaped thing. And I was amazed, because I wanted to use it for pool water. And I pumped it all out, and I went down inside. I needed an 8-foot ladder to get to the bottom of that. And the brickwork
That was all brick?
perfect. Then it came up to the top, and there was no outlet. I said, how does the water get out of here? And the pipe was in the cellar, and I could turn that on, much to Ruth Paul's dismay, because they thought I was stealing their water. Because the pipe ran all the way from Ruth's house to my cellar, across the field, an inch iron pipe.
Wow.
But the, what were we talking about? Oh,
The water line, yeah, cistern.
Yeah. Was the only water, and they upgraded the house a bit to make it a little more modern, so to speak. The pitcher pump and the iron sink was still there, but they put a modern white porcelain toilet in the middle of the kitchen floor. It was,
That seems like an odd choice.
the side room had a tin shower stall with 6 feet of newspapers in the stall. That never got used. And then there was the water. So I had to talk my mother-in-law to let me take her daughter. It's been a great place to grow up. And my kids, we have pictures of all 10 grandchildren sitting on hay balls in back whenever they balled the hay instead of bale. First thing we do is put a kid on it, take a picture. We have pictures. And then, of course, when it went into conservation, what a gift that was, you know. We threw a little party for them, as a matter of fact, in that barn, because that was doomed to be a Marriott, a Walmart, you know.
Right, a Walmart at one point, that
Yeah.
came close.
But, no, great place to live, great people.
Ready?
Yep. We still have a couple more questions, yeah.
Yep.
What, I'm new to the area, I came here in 1966. But as I look at the Scammon property when I drive down 33, the lady that lives over here, I know that part of it. And I know about some other pieces. But what's the future of this? The piece that's not in forestry and the piece that's not in conservation, they must be two different pieces, correct?
So, you know, all of this piece right here that I'm outlining, that's all for Forest Society property,
Okay.
so that is protected. It's
So the
never
current
developed.
Scammon Farm that I know since I've been here, of Doug and,
Yeah, which is over
That's
on,
on 108, not 33.
yeah, so that's over on this side.
okay, all right, now I got it. Now you got me right. Okay, now I get it.
Yeah, so the Scammons Garden Center. is right
Yes,
there.
okay, that's what I needed to see.
Okay.
All right, now I
And
understand.
what's the relationship then there?
You have to go way back
Oh, you do?
to the first Richard.
Really?
Did he own that piece that's currently owned by the current residents?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay,
But his youngest son, Humphrey, am I right, Stella? Went to Saco, Maine, and that's the branch that Doug Scammon comes from.
Okay.
And
Okay.
and the name, the spelling changed in that branch in Saco at some point. And then some of them came back to Stratham, which is wonderful. But the farm that Doug and Stella are on today, to my knowledge, was not part of the O.N. Scammon Farm that we're talking about tonight.
okay, that clears up a lot.
It is confusing, just like the Richards. It's the Scammons. It's
Well, I
two
was
spellings.
okay until I heard you say Doug once, and I said.
Oh,
Lorraine has a question.
yep.
I want to take you back to the Richards.
Okay.
One of the Richards, and if you can tell us where he fits into the family, was very famous as a political scientist and commentator,
Right.
and really created, I think he was the first original TV talking head on politics. So tell
Yeah,
us
so
about
that's,
his
Top left.
that's Richard M. Scammon.
I used
And
to
that's
see him
actually Ann
on TV.
Scammon, who's sitting over there, his father. Yeah, and so he was a political analyst, basically.
The Census Bureau,
Yeah, worked for he ran the Census Bureau
DC.
under President Kennedy. And I remember as a kid watching him on like NBC and stuff. Like he was one of the first kind of political, political pundits, I guess. Out there.
So did Bill Sims live here for the rest of his life, or?
No, he when the farm was sold,
Yeah.
he moved to Santa Fe.
Oh,
So he
okay.
moved back out west, not to California, but to Santa Fe, and he became kind of a. My cousin and I were just talking about what he actually did, and my recollection is he was like a director of development for like the state of New Mexico, I believe.
Yes.
And he lived in Santa Fe. Yeah. So the good looks, I guess.
Yeah.
He's he was a nephew of Julia, but you can see that if you go look at all the Scammons, there is a hairline resemblance in the Scammon that isn't in the Sims line.
He used to negotiate it when we bought our property,
Oh, really? Oh, that's
Yeah.
interesting. Wow.
dealt with him.
Yeah. Yeah, another interesting thing about Bill Sims is he did have kind of a political side to him too. Kind of like my uncle Richard here, who was his whole life was kind of in politics on the sidelines. He was actually the assistant to the mayor of Minneapolis when Hubert Humphrey was the mayor, and then helped with Hubert Humphrey's election campaign and things like that. But that's about as far as he went kind of in the political side of things. But I guess also that a good hairline and looks helped him in the political side.
Any last questions? Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.